the sort of space that's usually posited when we're talking about the spatialization of knowledge, when that metaphor is invoked, as it is when we talk about information space, for example, or occasionally the cyberspace of the internet, or spatial metaphors that apply to just distribution of data. That kind of space is strangely disembodied somehow. It's almost Newtonian. If you were to draw a picture of that space or imagine that space, it would be it'll be a little bit like the space that you find in some of Escher's etchings. There's one I'm thinking of particularly, which is a really clear kind of elucidation of Newtonian space. It's just a sort of endless grid, three-dimensional Cartesian grid with kind of boxes at the intersections. And that endless grid, that infinite space, which is in Newtonian terms at least, is this sort of static background against which the action happens, and in which there is no preferred place to stand. Every part of that space is the same as every other part. It's completely neutral in relation to any kind of observer. In fact, it doesn't require an observer. That Newtonian space, which is, I think, is the one that tends to dominate spatial metaphors, even though it's covert. We don't think of it in those terms, of course. It's completely unconscious. Nevertheless, I think that's what's going on. I think it does miss things. I think it does miss elements of the structure of knowledge, and how we can think of knowledge, for a number of reasons. Firstly, it doesn't capture personal experience. And space is something that we personally experience. We don't experience Newtonian space, really. We experience ourselves standing at the centre of a kind of environment, under a bowl of sky with a disk of Earth around us, and we, and all of the perspectival effects and so on that come with that, and all of the personal investment we may have in space and place. So Newtonian space, in reality and in this metaphorical use, fails to capture that phenomenological position, the first-person perspective. It also misses out on some key features of real experience. For example, Newtonian space doesn't have the concept of the horizon. There's no need for the horizon. The horizon is something that only emerges as a feature on a landscape, as a feature in experience, when there is an experiencer occupying a certain part of space and looking out across the surface of a very large globe, really, a very large ball in that space. So horizons are an example of something that misses out. It's just absent in Newtonian space. Also, perspective itself is kind of absent. We talk about perspective routinely in sort of vernacular terms, but in terms of kind of rigorous application to understanding of knowledge, there's no real corollary for perspective. So those things are absent from Newtonian space, whereas they are absolutely there in phenomenal space. And of course, also, it's pretty well established now that Newtonian space isn't real. It's an idealization based on a very particular way of looking at the universe. In an expanding universe like ours, I assume that's what we're living in, there really is an horizon. There is a singularity, there is a centre, there is a place to stand, kind of. Space is infinite, it's the background against which events take place in time. It's intimately implicated with time and braided up with time, and braided up with the events that take place in time and in space. So Newtonian space really gives way to Einsteinian space, I guess, I mean Kaust's space, or some version of that, and also to phenomenal space. Those also have features which Newtonian space lacks. So if we're using space as a metaphor, it seems slightly unfortunate that we might idealize the space in which that metaphor operates, particularly the allocation of knowledge to space as a metaphor. If we do that, what we're in danger of doing, I think, is kind of idealizing the space of knowledge in the way that Newton and others in the 16th, 17th century idealized space itself. It takes the body out of it, ignores relativistic effects, suppresses the concept of the horizon, and abandons the notion of perspective.